One broom, 4 men, and a message that would break Chisholm Ease's life apart. The day started like any other dusty morning in Umuahia. Before the sun came up, Chisholm was already awake, lighting the firewood under her 3-legged cooking pot and stirring thin rice porridge for her 4 children. Her hands moved quickly, and her mind was busy with worries. Would they have enough cassava to sell this week? Could Chidi's torn school uniform last a little longer? Outside, the dry Harmattan wind blew dust everywhere. On their zinc roof, their cassava plants, even on the children's old school notebooks. Life was hard, but they managed. Her husband, Emeka, worked at the bottling factory in Aba Town and brought home just enough money to take care of them. It wasn't much, but it was their life. Until that morning, when 4 men came to their gate. No smiles, no greetings, only the kind of silence that tells you something terrible is about to happen. Chisholm was in the front yard, broom in hand, humming softly as she swept the packed dirt around their home. The familiar work gave her time to plan. Then she saw them coming, 3 village elders walking slowly toward her house, their faces serious and sad. Behind them was Pastor Uzoma from their community church, his Bible clutched tightly against his chest. Something in their walk, in their eyes, made Chisholm's heart stop before they even spoke a word. The broom slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. Her throat went dry. Somehow, her body understood what was coming before the words were even spoken. "Our wife," the oldest elder said gently. His voice was heavy, like he was carrying a weight too difficult to bear. "We bring heavy news." Time seemed to slow down as they explained. The workers' bus from the bottling factory had crashed. The brakes failed on that steep hill just before the Imo River Bridge, a stretch of road everyone knew was dangerous, especially during Harmattan, when dust made everything slippery. The bus had plunged into the river below. 23 workers didn't make it out alive. Emeka was one of them. They told her the details in gentle voices, how they had identified him by the factory ID card still hanging around his neck, how the company had already promised to cover funeral expenses, how sorry everyone was for her loss. The strange thing was, Chisholm didn't fall apart right there. She didn't scream or faint or collapse. Instead, a strange calmness took over, like her mind needed to protect itself from the full impact of what was happening. She nodded, asked appropriate questions, thanked them for bringing the news. She even offered them water, as custom demanded for visitors. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was only after they all left, after she slowly walked into the bedroom she had shared with Emeka for 15 years, after she gently closed the door behind her, that the first tears came. Silent streams running down her face as she sat on the edge of their bed. She picked up his pillow, pressed it against her face, breathing in his scent that still lingered there. But even in this moment of unbearable pain, reality kept knocking. The sound of children playing down the road reminded her that soon her 4 children would come home from school, innocent, unaware that their world had just been shattered, that their father, who always brought little treats on payday, who helped with homework each night, who dreamed of sending them all to university someday, would never walk through their door again. How would she tell them? What words could possibly explain to a 14-year-old boy, 10-year-old twin girls, and a 6-year-old little boy that their father was gone forever? Chisholm wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper. She couldn't afford the luxury of falling apart completely. Not with 4 children who would need her strength more than ever before. Not with school fees coming due next month. Not with an uncertain future suddenly stretching before her like a dark road with no lights to guide the way. The Harmattan winds continued to blow outside, dust settling on everything just like before. But for Chisholm Ease, nothing would ever be the same again. How do you tell your children that their father is never coming home again? This was the question crushing Chisholm's chest as she sat waiting for her children to return from school. Ikenna, her firstborn at 14, was the serious one. Tall for his age, just like Emeka, with the same thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything. He was smart too, always top of his class, making his father so proud. Emeka would often say, "That boy will be a doctor someday, mark my words." Then there were the twins, Ngozi and Neka, 10 years old and impossible to separate. Those two were always whispering secrets to each other, playing tricks on their brothers, giggling behind their hands, but Chisholm knew their mischief hid hearts as soft as fresh bread. When a neighbor's cat had kittens last year, the twins had cried for 3 days when they couldn't keep one. And little Chitty, just 6 years old, who looked so much like Emeka, it sometimes took Chisholm's breath away. That gap between his front teeth when he smiled, the way he tilted his head to the side when something confused him. Pure Emeka, through and through. Chidi still believed his father was some kind of superhero who could fix anything from broken toys to scraped knees. The neighbors had gathered at Chisholm's compound after hearing the news. Women from nearby homes brought small pots of soup and jars of palm oil, the traditional first response to tragedy in their community. They sat with her in silence, occasionally murmuring prayers, waiting with her for the children to return from school. When the children finally appeared on the dirt path leading to their home, they were doing what they always did. Ikenna walking slightly ahead, carrying not just his bag, but Chidi's as well. The twins skipping along side by side, and little Chidi trying to keep up, chattering about something that had happened in his classroom that day. But their normal after-school routine shattered the moment they entered the compound. Seeing their mother surrounded by somber neighbors, Ikenna knew instantly. The school bag slid from his shoulder and hit the ground with a thud. He stood frozen, his teenage face crumpling as he shook his head back and forth, rejecting the truth before it was even spoken. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, Mama, no." The twins stopped their skipping mid-step. They reached for each other's hands, gripping so tightly their knuckles turned white. Their usual endless chatter died in their throats. But it was little Chidi who truly broke Chisholm's heart. He looked around at all the sad faces, confusion spreading across his small features. Then, in his high, clear voice that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, he asked, "Where is Papa? Is he bringing sweets today? It's Friday. He always brings sweets on Friday." How do you answer that? How do you destroy a child's world with words? Somehow, Chisholm found the strength to gather her children close, to tell them what had happened. Ikenna turned and punched the wall of their house, then crumpled to his knees, sobbing. The twins wailed loudly, clinging to each other like they were drowning. And Chidi, poor Chidi, kept asking when Papa was coming back, unable to understand why everyone was crying. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief and tradition. Their community had specific rituals for mourning, relatives coming from nearby villages to stay with them, neighbors bringing food and firewood, church members taking turns to pray with the family. Women sat with Chisholm through long nights when sleep refused to come, listening as she worried aloud about how she would feed her children now that Emeka's income was gone. The factory sent a representative who handed over Emeka's final wages and a small death benefit, a sum that seemed substantial at first, but that Chisholm knew wouldn't stretch beyond a few months. The man also brought a letter expressing the company's condolences, a form letter with Emeka's name filled in, not even signed by hand. When the day of the funeral arrived, the entire village gathered. Everyone respected Emeka. He wasn't like some factory workers who drank away their paychecks at the palm wine bars on the way home. Instead, he taught Sunday school at church, saved diligently for his children's education, and dreamed aloud about seeing all four through university one day. As they lowered Emeka's simple wooden coffin into the red earth of the cemetery, Chisholm felt as if part of herself was being buried too. Her legs nearly gave way beneath her, and if not for Ikenna suddenly standing tall beside her, his arms strong around her shoulders despite his tears, she might have collapsed. "God knows best," the mourners told her as they filed past. "Take heart. Be strong for the children." Empty phrases that people say when they don't know what else to offer. Words that did nothing to fill the massive void Emeka had left in their lives. Words that couldn't pay school fees, or put food on the table, or mend the hole in their family. That night, after returning from the cemetery, all four children refused to sleep in their usual spots. Instead, they dragged their sleeping mat into the main room and huddled together. Ikenna, with one arm protectively around Chidi, the twins curled against each other like they had been in the womb. None of them wanted to be alone with their grief. After they finally fell asleep, exhausted from days of crying, Chisholm sat alone in the darkness of their small compound. The moon cast long shadows as she faced the brutal truth of her situation. She was now the sole provider for four children, with minimal education, few marketable skills, and rapidly dwindling resources. The weight of Emeka's absence pressed down on her chest like a stone. It wasn't just the loss of her husband and the father of her children, it was the loss of security, of stability, of knowing that no matter how difficult things got, they faced it together. Now she was alone, and the path ahead looked impossible to navigate. As Chisom sat alone in the darkness, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. What skills did she have to support her family? She had only finished primary school before her father arranged her marriage to Emeka when she was just 16. For 15 years, she had been a wife and mother, cooking, cleaning, raising children, tending their small cassava farm. None of these were skills that could earn enough money to feed 4 growing children and keep them in school. The small patch of cassava they grew barely supplemented their meals. Sometimes there was a little extra to trade with neighbors, cassava for salt, cassava for palm oil, but never enough to sell for actual cash in the market. And now, Emeka's steady paycheck from the factory was gone forever. Chisom's mind raced through their financial situation like a woman drowning. Their rent would be due to the landlord in just 2 months. Right after that, school fees for the new term would need to be paid. Food prices at the market seemed to jump higher every week. A cup of rice that cost 50 naira last month now cost 65. Every time she went shopping, she came home with less but spent more. In all these years of marriage, she had never felt so alone with such enormous problems. Emeka had always been the one to figure things out when money was tight. They were a team. Now, the other half of that team was gone. For the first time since those men had appeared at her compound with the terrible news, Chisom allowed herself to truly break down. She covered her mouth with her wrapper cloth to muffle the sounds, not wanting to wake the children who had finally cried themselves to sleep. Her body shook with sobs as the tears came. Not the silent, controlled tears from before, but gut-wrenching cries that made her gasp for breath. "God, why have you forsaken me?" she whispered into the darkness. "What did I do to deserve this? How am I supposed to do this alone?" The answer to her desperate prayer came the following week, though not in any form she would have chosen. A shiny car, the kind rarely seen on the dusty roads of their village, pulled up outside her compound. Village children appeared from nowhere, gathering to stare at the vehicle with wide eyes and pointing fingers. Out stepped Uzoma, Emeka's older brother from Port Harcourt. He wore a bright purple agbada with gold embroidery, multiple gold rings, and sunglasses that he did not remove even as he entered the shade of Chisom's compound. The smell of expensive cologne announced his presence before he even spoke. Uzoma was everything Emeka was not. Loud where Emeka had been thoughtful, flashy where Emeka had been modest, boastful where Emeka had been humble. He was always talking about his latest business deals in Port Harcourt, though nobody seemed to understand exactly what business he was in. While Emeka had faithfully sent money home to their aging parents every month, Uzoma visited perhaps once a year, bringing flashy gifts, but little actual support. Word spread quickly, and soon the village elders gathered to welcome Uzoma properly. He accepted their greetings with exaggerated importance, distributing small amounts of cash to each elder. A show of generosity that Chisom knew was more about impressing others than actual kindness. "My brother's widow cannot suffer," Uzoma announced grandly, his voice carrying so everyone in the compound could hear. "I will take care of everything. This is what family does." The elders nodded approvingly, murmuring among themselves about what a good brother Uzoma was. But Chisom had known Uzoma for 15 years. He noticed how his generosity always came with strings attached. Later, when the elders had left and the children were playing outside, Uzoma finally revealed his true intentions. He helped himself to the small bottle of schnapps he had brought, not bothering to offer any to Chisom before pouring himself a generous amount. "The tradition is simple," he stated, swirling the liquid in his glass. "You will become my wife. The bride price has already been paid to your family years ago. I will take you and the children to Port Harcourt. The boys can go to better schools there. The girls too, if you insist." Chisom stared at him in shock, unable to speak for several seconds. The practice of wife inheritance, where a widow was married to her husband's brother, was an old tradition that was dying out in most communities. Even in the more traditional villages, it was becoming a choice rather than an obligation. Besides, The mere thought of being married to Uzoma made her stomach turn. She had never liked him, with his roving eyes that undressed every woman he met, the smell of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the odor of dishonesty that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I cannot marry you, Uzoma," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. Emeka would not want this. The change in Uzoma's expression was instant. The friendly facade crumbled, revealing the anger and entitlement beneath. His smile disappeared, replaced by a sneer that distorted his features. "Then you are on your own," he snapped, slamming his glass down so hard that schnapps splashed onto the table. "Don't expect any help from the family. The house, the land, everything belonged to my brother, which means it returns to our family now." "This house is rented," Chisholm replied, maintaining her composure despite her heart pounding in her chest. "And the small farm was given to us by my father when we married." Uzoma stood up, towering over her in an attempt to intimidate. "We'll see what the elders say about that," he threatened, his voice low and dangerous before he stormed out, leaving the door open behind him. Chisholm watched through the window as he stalked toward his shiny car, already pulling out his phone to call someone. She knew this wasn't over. Uzoma wasn't a man who accepted rejection easily, especially from a woman he saw as beneath him. One possible solution to her desperate situation had just walked out the door. But even facing poverty and uncertainty, Chisholm knew in her heart that marrying Uzoma would be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. There had to be another way forward, even if she couldn't see it yet. Uzoma was not a man who gave up easily. Just as Chisholm expected, the very next day he called a meeting with the village elders. He arrived wearing an even more expensive outfit than before, his car freshly washed and gleaming in the morning sun. The meeting took place under the big mango tree in the center of the village, where important matters were always discussed. Uzoma sat with his legs spread wide, taking up more space than necessary, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. "Our traditions are clear," he told the 7 old men who sat in a half-circle facing him. "When a man dies, his possessions go back to his family. Emeka's land should return to the AK family. Since his widow refuses to follow tradition and marry me, she has no right to anything." Chisholm sat quietly on a low stool at the edge of the circle, as was expected of women during such meetings. Inside, her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. She noticed how Uzoma kept saying Emeka's land when the small farm plot had actually come from her own father as a wedding gift. Most of the elders shifted uncomfortably as Uzoma spoke. They knew his demands were too harsh, but tradition was strong in their community, and Uzoma had not come empty-handed. Before the meeting, he had given each elder a brown envelope containing cash, and to the head elder, he had presented an expensive bottle of foreign whiskey. Chisholm watched their faces, trying to guess which way they would decide. If they sided with Uzoma, she would lose the farm that provided cassava and vegetables for her children. Without it, her situation would be even more desperate. The elders talked among themselves in low voices. 2 seemed firmly on Uzoma's side, nodding at everything he said. 3 others looked troubled, glancing occasionally at Chisholm with sympathy in their eyes. The remaining 2 kept their opinions hidden behind blank expressions. Then, when it seemed Uzoma might win through his gifts and loud arguments, Chief Nwosu spoke up. Chief Nwosu was the oldest man in the village, nearly 90 years old, with a face so lined it resembled the bark of an ancient tree. He rarely attended these meetings anymore due to his age, but something had brought him here today. "I have listened enough," Chief Nwosu said, his voice thin but clear. The other elders fell silent immediately, showing their respect for his age and wisdom. He turned to Uzoma, his cloudy eyes somehow still sharp. "That land belongs to Chisholm's father, who allowed his daughter and son-in-law to farm it when they married. I remember, because I was there when the agreement was made. It was never Emeka's alone to give or take, so it is not yours to claim." Uzoma tried to interrupt, but Chief Nwosu raised his hand, silencing him. "As for this talk of widow inheritance," the old man continued, "that practice has brought more tears than joy to our community. Many widows forced to marry brothers-in-law have suffered greatly. The woman has said no." He pointed a gnarled finger at Chisholm. "That is her right." The chief's words settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Even Uzoma seemed momentarily lost for words, his usual confidence shaken by the direct challenge from someone he couldn't easily intimidate or buy off. The other elders, perhaps relieved to have the decision taken from their hands, quickly agreed with Chief Nwosu. The land would remain with Chisom and her children, and no one would force her to marry Uzoma or anyone else against her will. Uzoma's face darkened with anger, but he knew better than to argue further. Challenging the oldest chief would only make him lose face in front of the whole village. He left the meeting without the usual parting ceremonies, his back stiff with wounded pride. The next morning, as Chisom was washing clothes outside her house, Uzoma stopped by on his way out of the village. His shiny car was packed with his belongings, ready for the return journey to Port Harcourt. "You think you've won," he said to her, his voice low and threatening. "But your victory will be short. You'll come begging to me soon enough, when your children are hungry and you have nowhere else to turn." Without waiting for her response, he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Chisom watched the car disappear down the dirt road with mixed feelings, relief that he was gone, but also worry about the future. She had won this battle, but the war to survive was just beginning. With Uzoma gone, Chisom had to face her next big challenge: how to feed her children and keep them in school without Emeka's income. The small farm would provide some food, but they needed money for everything else: rent, school fees, medicine, clothes. She started by selling things from their small home that they could live without. First went Emeka's radio that he used to listen to football matches on weekends. Then the wedding china plates that had been a gift from her aunt and were only used for special occasions. Finally, she sold Emeka's wristwatch, the one he had saved for months to buy and wore with such pride. Each sale felt like selling a piece of their life together, but her children's needs came first. When these small funds began to run out, Chisom knew she needed a more reliable source of income. She started waking up at 4 a.m. every morning to make akara and muamua to sell to travelers at the motor park where buses stopped on their way to the bigger towns. Her days became an endless cycle of work. Up before dawn to prepare her food for selling. A quick trip to the motor park to set up her small stall. Back home to get the children ready for school. Then off to work as a day laborer on other people's farms, planting, weeding, or harvesting for just enough money to buy ingredients for the next day's food sales. By the time she returned home in the evenings, her hands were cracked and bleeding. Her back ached from bending in the fields all day, and her feet were swollen from standing. But still, she managed to cook dinner for her children, check their homework, and mend their clothes before falling into an exhausted sleep, only to wake a few hours later and begin again. It was back-breaking work that earned barely enough to keep them fed. But Chisom held on to her dignity. She would show Uzoma and everyone else that she could stand on her own feet, even if those feet were tired and sore. She would not beg. Not yet. Not ever, if she could help it. Weeks passed, then months. Chisom worked harder than she ever had in her life, but it still wasn't enough. The small money she made from selling akara and working in other people's farms barely covered their daily needs. School fees were coming due soon, and she had no idea how she would pay them. Ikenna, her firstborn son, watched his mother with growing concern. At 14, he was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. He saw how she limped in the evenings from standing all day. He noticed how she gave the children larger portions and took less food for herself. He heard her coughing at night, a deep, wet cough that seemed to get worse each week. One evening, after the younger children had gone to bed, Ikenna sat down across from his mother at their small table. "Mama, I've been thinking," he said in a serious voice that made him sound much older than his years. "I should stop school and find work. Maybe at the bottling factory where Papa worked. They might hire me because of Papa." Chisom's head snapped up, her tired eyes suddenly fierce. "No," she said firmly, reaching across the table to hold her son's face between her rough, calloused hands. "Your father believed education was the only true inheritance he could give you. I will not take that away. Not while I have strength left in my body." "But Mama, you are killing yourself," Ikenna argued, tears forming in his eyes. "I see how hard you work, how tired you are. Let me help." "You help by studying hard and taking care of your brothers and sisters when I'm not here," Chisom told him. "That is enough for now." But even as she said these words, Chisholm knew her body was failing her. Years of having babies, carrying heavy loads, and working from dawn to dusk had already worn her down. Now, the relentless pace of her days was destroying what strength she had left. She ignored the signs as long as she could. The constant headaches, the pain in her chest when she breathed deeply, the fever that came and went. She couldn't afford to be sick. Her children couldn't afford for her to be sick. Then, 6 months after Emeka's death, on a rainy morning at the motor park, it happened. Chisholm was setting up her usual spot, arranging freshly fried akara on her tray, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. She heard people shouting as if from far away. Then everything went black as she collapsed to the ground, her tray of akara scattering in the muddy dust. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on a narrow bed in the small community health center. The first thing she saw was Ikenna sitting on a wooden chair beside her, still wearing his school uniform, now wrinkled and rumpled. His young face was drawn with worry, dark circles under his eyes showing he hadn't slept. "The doctor says you need rest, Mama," he said, when he saw she was awake, his voice cracking with emotion that he tried to hide. "You have pneumonia from working in the rain. Your body is very weak from not eating enough and working too hard." Panic shot through Chisholm, and she tried to sit up despite the stabbing pain in her chest. "The twins! And Chidi!" "Mrs. Obi from next door is watching them," Ikenna quickly assured her, gently pushing her back onto the pillow. "Everyone in the neighborhood is helping. The twins are helping her cook, and Chidi is playing with her grandson. They are okay for now." Chisholm relaxed slightly, but her mind was already racing ahead to all the problems this illness would cause. "My stall at the motor park—" "Mama," Ikenna interrupted, his young face suddenly stern in a way that reminded her painfully of Emeka. "You cannot continue like this. The doctor says you could have died if people hadn't brought you here quickly." "But what choice do I have?" Chisholm whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Who will feed you all if I don't work?" The doctor kept Chisholm at the health center for 3 days, giving her medicines for the pneumonia and insisting she needed complete rest. Ikenna came every day after school, bringing the twins and Chidi with him so they could see their mother was getting better. When she was finally released, Chisholm was shocked to learn that the hospital bill had used up almost all of their remaining savings. The money she'd been setting aside bit by bit for school fees was now gone, and she was still too weak to return to her full work schedule, though she tried her best to make small batches of akara for Ikenna to sell before school. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, she found a letter waiting when she returned home. The landlord was increasing their rent by 50%, starting next month. The new amount was far beyond what she could possibly pay, even if she was healthy and working at full strength. That night, after all 4 children had fallen asleep, crowded together on their sleeping mats, seeking comfort in each other's presence, Chisholm sat alone in the dark kitchen and wept silently. Not the noisy, gasping sobs of fresh grief, but the quiet, defeated tears of someone who sees no way forward. For the first time, Uzoma's offer began to seem less repulsive when weighed against her children's hungry faces and the very real threat of homelessness. The rainy season would start soon. Where would they go if they couldn't pay the rent? How would the children stay in school if they had no fixed home? Perhaps, for their sake, she should swallow her pride and accept his proposal. Maybe becoming Uzoma's wife, despite how much the thought disgusted her, was the sacrifice she needed to make for her children's future. As this thought formed in her mind, Chisholm felt a deep shame wash over her. What kind of life would that be? Living with a man she didn't respect, let alone love. What example would that set for her daughters? For her sons? But as the wind rattled the loose tin sheets of their roof and her chest ached with each breath, Chisholm faced the cruel truth. She was out of options, out of money, out of strength, out of time. After many sleepless nights filled with worry, Chisholm finally admitted to herself that she had run out of options. Her illness had used up their savings. The rent increase was impossible to pay. Her body was still weak from pneumonia. The truth hit her like a brick wall. She couldn't keep her family together anymore. Her sister in a village about 20 miles away had offered to take the twins. The sister had 3 children of her own already, but somehow she would manage with 2 more mouths to feed. At least there, Ngozi and Nneka could continue their education in the village school. Emeka's brother, Inoweri, not Uzoma, but his younger brother Uche, had reluctantly agreed to take Ikenna. Uche wasn't a wealthy man, just a school teacher with a small apartment. But he had promised to make sure Ikenna could continue his studies. That was the most important thing to Chisom, that her firstborn son's education wouldn't be interrupted. As for little Chidi, he would stay with Chisom. She planned to take him to Aba, the nearest city, where she hoped to find work as a house help or maybe in one of the markets. 6-year-olds were too young for boarding school, and besides, she couldn't bear the thought of having none of her children with her. At least with Chidi by her side, she would still feel like a mother. When Chisom told the children about her decision, their reactions broke her heart all over again. "No, Mama, please! We want to stay together!" the twins cried, holding each other tighter than ever. Ikenna didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the floor, his jaw tight, trying to be the man of the house even though he was only 14. Little Chidi looked confused. "But when will we all be together again?" he kept asking. "Soon," Chisom promised, though she had no idea if that was true. "As soon as I find good work in Aba, I will send for each of you. This is just for a short time." That night, she heard Ikenna crying quietly outside the house. He thought no one could hear him as he sat with his back against the mud wall, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Chisom wanted to go to him, to hold him, but something told her to give him this private moment. He was trying so hard to be strong in front of his siblings. The next morning, without telling his mother, Ikenna made a decision. He picked up his father's toolbox, the one thing of value they still owned. Emeka had been skilled with his hands and had collected these tools over many years. He had taught Ikenna how to use each one, showed him how to fix things around their small house. The toolbox was like having a piece of his father still with them, but sentimentality wouldn't pay the rent or buy food. Ikenna decided to walk to the market town 10 kilometers away, where he might get a better price for the tools than in their small village. "I'm going to visit my friend," he told his mother that morning. "I'll be back before dark." Chisom was busy packing their few belongings into bundles and didn't question him too closely. The walk to the market town was long under the hot sun. Ikenna's stomach growled with hunger. They had all been eating less to make their food stretch further. The toolbox grew heavy in his hands, but he kept going. If he could get enough money for these tools, maybe they could stay together for just one more month. Maybe in that time, his mother could find work. When he finally reached the busy market, he looked around for someone who might want to buy tools. He spotted a small stall where a man was fixing radios and other electronics. Perfect. Someone like that would understand the value of good tools. Ikenna approached the stall, gathering all his courage. The man looked up from the radio he was repairing. "Sir, I wish to sell these tools," Ikenna said, trying to sound more confident than he felt as he placed the worn leather case on the wooden counter. The man looked at Ikenna for a moment, noting his dusty clothes and thin frame. Then he opened the case and examined the contents with obvious interest. His fingers moved over the screwdrivers, pliers, and other tools with the appreciation of someone who understood their worth. "These are quality tools," he remarked, picking up a particularly well-maintained screwdriver. "Where did you get them?" Ikenna swallowed hard. "They belonged to my father," he replied, blinking rapidly to keep tears from falling. "He wouldn't cry here in the market like a small child. He taught me how to use each one." Something in Ikenna's voice made the man look up sharply. "Your father is no longer with us?" he asked gently. Ikenna could only shake his head at first. Then, finding his voice, he said, "He died in the bottling factory bus accident 6 months ago." The words hung in the air between them. Ikenna waited for the man to start bargaining, to offer him a price for the toolbox. Instead, the man's expression changed completely. He stared at Ikenna like he had seen a ghost. The man's face suddenly turned pale. He stared at Ikenna with wide eyes, like he had just seen something impossible. His hands actually started shaking a little. "What was your father's name?" he asked, his voice not much more than a whisper. "Emeka Eke," Ikenna replied, confused by the man's reaction. "He was a supervisor at the factory." The man slowly lowered himself onto his wooden stool, still clutching the screwdriver from the toolbox. He looked like he needed to sit down before his legs gave out. Emeka Eke, he repeated, saying the name carefully like he was making sure he heard it right. Tall man, with a small scar above his right eyebrow? Ikenna felt a jolt of surprise. Yes, that's exactly right. His father did have that scar, from an accident when he was younger. How did this stranger know such a specific detail? My name is Obinna Njoku, the man said, and Ikenna could hear that his voice wasn't steady anymore. Your father saved my life. Now it was Ikenna's turn to stare in complete disbelief. His mouth actually fell open. Of all the people he could have met at this market, of all the stalls he could have approached, could this really be happening? The bus accident. Obinna continued, his eyes now looking somewhere far away, like he was seeing it all happen again. I was one of 3 workers he helped escape through the window before... He couldn't finish the sentence. The memory seemed too painful for him to put into words. We tried to find his family afterward, Obinna went on after taking a deep breath. But no one at the factory knew exactly where you lived. They just said his family was from a small village, but didn't know which one. Ikenna was having trouble processing all this. This man had been there? Had seen his father in those final moments? Had been saved by him? It felt like his father was suddenly closer somehow, like a part of the story Ikenna hadn't known was finally being told. With trembling hands, Ikenna reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was creased from being folded and unfolded many times. The picture showed Chisholm with all 4 children, taken at Christmas the year before the accident. It was the last family photo they had. This is my mother and my siblings, Ikenna said, his voice cracking a little as he handed over the photo. We're about to be separated because we can't afford our rent. That's why I'm selling Papa's tools. Obinna took the photograph carefully, as if it was something precious and fragile. He studied the faces in the picture, the tired but smiling mother, the serious-looking older boy who must be Ikenna himself, the identical twin girls, and the small boy with the gap-toothed smile. His eyes lingered on each face. Then he looked up at Ikenna, and there was something new in his expression, a firmness, a decision that hadn't been there before. No, he said with surprising force, you will not sell these tools. He placed the screwdriver back in the toolbox and closed it firmly. And you will not be separated, he added, standing up from his stool. There was absolute determination in his voice now. Ikenna was confused. What did this man mean? He needed the money from selling the tools. That was the whole reason he had walked all this way. But sir, we need the money, Ikenna tried to explain. My mother is sick. We can't pay our rent. My uncle in Owerri will take me, and my aunt will take my sisters, but... Obinna held up his hand, stopping Ikenna mid-sentence. Your father pushed me through the bus window before going back to help others, he said, looking directly into Ikenna's eyes. He could have saved himself, but instead he saved me, a man he barely knew. I have carried that debt for 6 months, not knowing how to repay it. He picked up the toolbox and handed it back to Ikenna. Now I know, he said simply. This is no accident that you came to my stall today with these tools. This is God's doing. Ikenna took back the toolbox, still not understanding what was happening. Please, take me to your mother, Obinna said, already starting to pack up his repair tools and close his stall for the day. I need to speak with her immediately. But it's 10 kilometers to our village, Ikenna said. Then we better start walking, Obinna replied, locking up his stall. Or wait, my friend has a motorcycle. We can borrow it. Ikenna stood there, stunned, as Obinna quickly made arrangements with the man at the next stall. Everything was happening so fast. Just an hour ago, he had been prepared to sell his father's tools out of desperation. Now, this stranger, this man whose life his father had saved, was insisting on coming back to their village. What would his mother say? What did this mean for their family? For the first time in months, Ikenna felt something that had been missing since his father's death. A small, fragile spark of hope. Back at the small house, Chisholm was stirring a pot of thin, watery soup with just a few pieces of vegetables floating in it. It was all they had left. Tomorrow, they would start packing for their separate journeys. The twins were sitting quietly in the corner, not even playing their usual games. They hadn't smiled much since learning they would be sent to their aunt's house. Suddenly, the door burst open with such force that Chisholm jumped, nearly dropping the wooden spoon. Ikenna rushed in, out of breath, and with an excitement in his eyes that she hadn't seen in months. "Mama! Mama!" he shouted, his words coming out between deep breaths. "This is Mr. Obinna Njoku. Papa saved him from the bus." Behind Ikenna stood a middle-aged man carrying Emeka's toolbox. The stranger looked almost as excited as Ikenna, though more controlled. He had kind eyes and wore the simple clothes of a working man. Chisholm was confused. "What? Who? Ikenna, what are you talking about?" The twins and little Chidi crowded around, staring at the stranger with curiosity. "Your son brought me here to meet you," the man said, stepping forward. "My name is Obinna Njoku. I worked at the bottling factory with your husband." "He was on the bus when it crashed, Mama," Ikenna interrupted, unable to contain himself. "Papa pushed him through the window before going back for others." Chisholm felt her legs go weak and sat down on the small wooden stool by the cooking fire. You were there?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Obinna nodded. "Your husband gave his life saving mine and 2 others. For 6 months, I've been trying to find his family to thank them, to help somehow. But the factory had no address for you, only that you lived in a small village. And you found us because I went to sell Papa's tools at his stall," Ikenna added, still amazed by this turn of events. Chisholm looked at the pot of thin soup, embarrassed that she had nothing proper to offer a guest. But without hesitation, she invited Obinna to share their small meal. He accepted graciously, seeming to understand the significance of the gesture. As they ate, Obinna told them the full story. He had been sitting near the back of the bus that day, dozing after the long shift, when he was jolted awake by screaming and the sensation of falling. The bus had gone off the bridge and was filling with water. People were panicking, pushing each other. The doors were jammed shut. Then your husband, he was so calm, he started breaking windows and helping people out. He pushed me through a window when my leg was trapped under a seat. I begged him to come too, but he said there were others still inside. The family listened in silent awe. This was something they hadn't known, the exact way Emeka had died. It was painful to hear, but also strangely comforting. He had died as he had lived, thinking of others. After I recovered, I used the insurance money to start my repair business, Obinna continued. But I've never stopped looking for Emeka's family. I owe him everything. He looked around at their sparse home, at the children's thin faces, at the nearly empty pot. Your husband gave me a second chance at life, he told Chisholm, his voice firm with conviction. Now, let me help give you one. Chisholm didn't know what to say. They had been struggling for so long, trying to make it on their own. Could she accept help from this stranger? But then, he wasn't really a stranger, was he? He was connected to them by Emeka's final act of bravery. The next morning, Obinna returned as promised. This time he brought his wife, Ada, a warm, practical woman with quick hands and a ready smile. They had been talking all night, Obinna explained, about how they could help Emeka's family. My brother-in-law owns several stalls in the market town, Obinna told Chisholm. He's expanding his business to another town and needs someone trustworthy to manage his fabric shop here. Chisholm shook her head doubtfully. I know nothing about running a shop. You can learn, Ada said confidently. And I need help with my tailoring business. I've seen you're wearing a dress you made yourself. You have good stitching skills. I can teach you more. Obinna added the most important part. The position comes with rooms behind the shop. You and all your children could live there. Chisholm looked at Ikenna, who was nodding eagerly. Then at the twins, who were holding hands and looking hopeful for the first time in days. Finally at little Chidi, who was smiling that gap-toothed smile that reminded her so much of Emeka. You would do this for us? She asked, still not quite believing it. Your husband didn't stop to think whether I was worth saving, Obinna said simply. He just did what was right. Now, it's my turn. 2 weeks later, after frantic packing and tearful goodbyes to neighbors who had helped them through hard times, Chisholm and her 4 children moved into the rooms behind the fabric shop in the market town. The space was small but clean. 2 rooms with an area for cooking at the back. It felt like a palace compared to what they had almost been forced to accept. Chisholm worked hard, learning both businesses, managing the fabric shop during the day and helping Ada with tailoring in the evenings. The hours were long and the work was challenging, but unlike her previous desperate efforts, this work came with fair pay and dignity. Best of all, for the first time since Emeka's death, she could afford to keep all 4 children together and in school. Watching them walk off together each morning in their uniforms, Ikenna protectively shepherding his younger siblings, Chisholm felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The thread connecting them to Emeka hadn't been broken after all. In a way Chisholm could never have imagined, it had become stronger, extending beyond death to weave a new beginning for them all. Almost a year had gone by since Chisholm and her children moved behind the fabric shop. Life was much better now than during those hard times after Emeka died. Chisholm had gotten really good at sewing. She learned fast under Ada's teaching. Her regular stitching was neat, but her embroidery work, the fancy decorative stitching, was what people really noticed. She could make flowers and patterns that looked almost real on the cloth. "Mama, Mrs. Nkichi wants you specially to do the embroidery for her daughter's wedding clothes," Ngozi told her one day, looking proud as she gave this message. "That's the 3rd big order this week," Chisholm said with a smile as she put thread through her needle. The twins were doing better in school now that they weren't worried all the time. Little Chidi played with neighborhood kids and laughed a lot. And Ikenna, now 15 and getting tall like his father, split his time between school and helping Obinna fix things at the repair shop. One Wednesday evening, Chisholm was closing the shop by pulling down the metal shutters when a nice black car stopped in front of the store. It wasn't flashy like Uzoma's car had been, but it was clean and good quality. A man got out. He was tall with clean, neat clothes. Chisholm felt a little nervous. Well-dressed strangers often meant trouble. "Excuse me," the man called out as he walked toward her. "I'm looking for someone." As he got closer, Chisholm saw he was holding something, a handkerchief with the flower pattern she had made last month. She knew every stitch on it. "I'm looking for the woman who made this embroidery," he said, holding it up. "That's mine," Chisholm said quietly, wondering if there was something wrong with her work. "Is there a problem with it?" The man smiled big. "A problem? No, it's perfect. My name is Kelechi Okafor. I own a clothing shop in Port Harcourt that sells traditional clothes with modern styles. Your work is exactly what I need." Chisholm stared at him, confused. "My embroidery?" "Yes," Kelechi nodded eagerly. "One of my customers bought this in the market and showed it to me. I've been looking everywhere for someone who can make patterns like this. Your style mixes old methods with new ideas. That's what my customers want." They talked as it got dark outside. Kelechi wanted her to make embroidery designs for his expensive clothes. He mentioned paying her more money than she made in a whole month at the fabric shop. "Would you like to come inside for some water?" Chisholm finally remembered to ask. "It's getting dark." Kelechi followed her into their small living space where the twins were helping Chidi with his homework. They looked up with curious faces. While Chisholm poured water from their clay pot into a cup, Kelechi looked around the simple room. His eyes stopped at the framed photo on the wall, the only decoration they had. It showed Emeka at church the year before the accident. Kelechi suddenly froze, the cup halfway to his mouth. "That man," he said, pointing to the photo, his voice sounding strange. "Who is he?" His tone made everyone look up. "My late husband, Emeka Eke," Chisholm answered, wondering why he asked. The man's eyes got very big. "Emeka Eke, from the bottling factory in Aba?" Before Chisholm could ask how he knew this, the door opened and Obinna walked in with Ikenna, both dusty from working at the repair shop. Obinna stopped when he saw their visitor. For a moment, he just stared with his mouth open. Then, with a loud shout that made everyone jump, he rushed forward. "Kelechi! Brother! What are you doing here?" Obinna and Kelechi held each other tight, tears in their eyes as they embraced. The children watched with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. Chisholm stood frozen, her heart beating fast as she watched these 2 grown men crying and laughing at the same time. When they finally let go, both men wiped their eyes with the backs of their hands. The room was quiet, except for their heavy breathing. Everyone was waiting for an explanation. Obinna turned to face Chisholm and the children, his face glowing with happiness. "This is Kelechi," he said, his voice shaking a little. He's the second person Emeka saved from the bus accident. Chisholm felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. And there was a third man, too, Obinna continued. David. He works at the bank in Aba now. The twins looked at each other with big eyes. Little Chidi moved closer to his mother, sensing something important was happening. Ikenna stood tall, his face serious as he took in this news about his father. All this time? Chisholm whispered. All this time there were 2 more people he saved? Kelechi nodded, still unable to speak properly. He kept looking at Emeka's picture on the wall, then back at the children, seeing their father in their faces. Soon, Obinna's wife Ada arrived, surprised to find a stranger in their home. But when Obinna explained who Kelechi was, she immediately started preparing food. This was a night for a special meal, even if they only had simple ingredients. As they sat around the small table eating cassava and fish stew, Kelechi's story came out, bit by bit. After the accident, he had spent weeks in the hospital with broken bones. The insurance company had paid him some money, not much, but enough to start a small clothing shop. At first, I just sold whatever I could get, Kelechi explained, using his hands to show how small his first shop was. But then, I noticed people really liked traditional clothes with modern touches, so I focused on that. The business grew slowly but steadily. Now he had a proper boutique in Port Harcourt, with 5 people working for him. All because he survived that day. I kept asking about Emeka's family, Kelechi said, looking at Chisom. But the factory people wouldn't give information. They said it was against their rules. Chisom shook her head, thinking about all those months of struggling, not knowing these connections existed. Kelechi reached into his pocket and pulled out the handkerchief with Chisholm's embroidery. He spread it carefully on the table like it was made of gold. Last week, a woman came to my shop wearing this. I asked where she got it, and she told me about a market stall with beautiful embroidery. I had to find the person who made it for my business. I never imagined... His voice broke. He took a deep breath. It's not just chance, Kelechi said firmly, looking around at them all. It's God's way of completing what Emeka started. His final act of kindness is still working, bringing us together to help each other. The twins nodded, understanding perfectly. Even at their age, they could see how strange and wonderful this connection was. After the meal, the children went to sleep, buzzing with excitement about the day's events. The adults stayed up late, sharing stories about Emeka. Chisholm learned new things about her husband, how calm he'd been during the accident, how he'd organized people when everyone was panicking, how he'd gone back into the sinking bus to help others when he could have saved himself. By the time they finished talking, it was well past midnight. Kelechi refused to drive back to his hotel in the dark. He slept on a mat in the main room, looking happier than a man sleeping on the floor should be. Morning came with new energy. After a quick breakfast, Kelechi announced that they needed to go to Aba. We have to see David, he said. He's been waiting for this moment too. Chisholm felt nervous about leaving the shop closed, but Obinna's wife promised to watch it. This was too important to miss. Obinna closed his repair business for the day too, something he never did. They squeezed into Kelechi's car, Chisholm in front, Obinna in back, with Ikenna, who insisted on coming. The other children stayed with Ada, though they complained about missing out. The drive to Aba took over an hour on bumpy roads. Chisholm hadn't been back to the city since Emeka's funeral. Too many sad memories. But today felt different, like she was following a path that had been waiting for her. The bank was a big building in the center of town. When they walked in, cool air hit their faces. Everything was clean and shiny. People in nice clothes moved around looking busy and important. Chisholm felt out of place in her simple dress. Kelechi seemed to know where to go. He spoke to a security man who nodded and made a phone call. Minutes later, a man in a neat suit came hurrying across the marble floor. "Kelechi!" he called out. Then he saw Obinna and stopped walking. "Obinna? Is it really you?" The men hugged, causing people in the bank to stare. But they didn't care. David looked at Chisholm with questioning eyes. "This is Emeka's wife," Kelechi said, "and this is his eldest son, Ikenna." David's face changed. He reached out slowly and took Chisholm's hands in his. "I have been praying to meet you," he said quietly, "every day since the accident." He led them to a private office with a desk and comfortable chairs. Once the door closed, David told his story. Like the others, he had been saved by Emeka's quick thinking. He had used his insurance money to get more education, which helped him get this job at the bank. "But I couldn't just move on with my life," David said, leaning forward in his chair. "Not when I knew there were families suffering. The factory never did right by the people who died." He explained how he had been working with lawyers and other survivors to force the company to pay proper compensation. It had taken almost 2 years of fighting, but they were finally making progress. "There's a settlement being arranged," David said, looking straight at Chisom. "As Emeka's widow, you're entitled to a significant payment, especially since he died saving others." Chisom couldn't speak. Her mind was racing, thinking about what this could mean for her children's future. "When will this happen?" Obinna asked. "The final papers will be signed next month," David replied. "I've kept a file with all the family's information, but Emeka's was incomplete. Now I can fill in the missing details." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder with Emeka's name on it. With careful hands, he wrote down Chisom's information, each pen stroke bringing her family closer to security. As they left the bank, Chisom felt like she was dreaming. The sun was bright overhead, the street noisy with people and cars, but inside she felt quiet and peaceful. Ikenna walked beside her, taller than ever, looking so much like his father. "Papa is still taking care of us," he said simply, and Chisom knew it was true. The circle that started with Emeka's sacrifice was finally complete. His last act of bravery had set in motion waves that were coming back to lift up his family when they needed it most. The settlement money from the factory arrived 3 months after that day at the bank. Chisom couldn't believe her eyes when David handed her the check. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her hands actually shook as she held the paper. "This won't bring Emeka back," David said gently, "but at least it will help your family have the future he wanted for you." Chisom nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. She remembered all those nights of despair when she'd wondered how she would feed her children the next day. The memory of Uzoma's ugly threats came back to her too. How different things were now. The first thing Chisom did with the money was buy a small but proper house in the market town. It had 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a gas stove instead of firewood, and most wonderful of all, running water that came right out of a tap. The children couldn't stop turning the faucet on and off that first day, amazed that water appeared like magic. "Mama, look! Turn it on! Turn it off!" little Chidi kept saying, his face bright with wonder. But the best part of the house wasn't the walls or the water. It was hearing her children laugh inside it. The twins had space to play without being scolded for making noise. Ikenna had his own small desk by the window where he could study without distractions, and Chisom had a room just for sewing, with good light and space to spread out her materials. Life got busy in a good way. Chisom's embroidery work for Kelechi's boutique became so popular that he paid her extra for each piece. People started asking for her by name. "I need the flowers that Chisom makes," customers would insist at Kelechi's shop in Port Harcourt. "No one else does them the same way." She still managed the fabric shop too, which gave her a steady weekly income. Between these jobs and the settlement, money safely kept in the bank, Chisom could now afford things that once seemed impossible. Good food every day, proper school uniforms, medicine when someone got sick, and even small treats like ice cream on Sundays. The biggest change was in the children's education. Chisom moved them to better schools where the classrooms weren't overcrowded and the teachers showed up every day. She bought all the books they needed instead of making them share with other students. "Mama, look at my math test," Ngozi said one day, proudly showing a paper marked with a big A. Her twin sister Neka had gotten an A too. They had always been smart girls, but now they had the chance to really show it. Ikenna, now 16, was top of his class. His teachers said he had a special talent for engineering and should definitely go to university. When Chisom heard this, she couldn't help thinking how proud Emeka would have been. He had always said education was the most important thing he could give his children. Nearly 2 years passed since Emeka's death. The sharp pain of loss had softened into something Chisom could carry without being crushed by it. She still missed him terribly, especially in quiet moments at night, but she had found a way to keep living. One evening, Obinna, Kelechi, and David came to her house for dinner. They often got together like this, these three men whose lives were tied to hers through Emeka's final act. After the meal, when the children were playing in the yard, the men shared their new idea. "We've been talking," Obinna started, looking serious, "about how to honor Emeka's memory in a bigger way." David nodded. "Each of us owes our lives to him. And now we're all doing well because of that second chance. So we want to create something meaningful," Kelechi continued, "something that would make him proud." They explained their plan, the Emeka Eke Memorial Scholarship for children who had lost parents. Each of the three men would contribute money every year to help these children stay in school. "And we want Ikenna to help choose who gets the scholarships," Obinna added. "He knows better than anyone what these children are going through." Chisholm looked at these three men, once strangers, now like brothers to her, and felt overwhelmed by their goodness. This was Emeka's real legacy, she thought, not just saving lives that day, but starting a chain of kindness that kept growing. The first group of scholarship recipients included 5 children from different villages. Ikenna took his role in selecting them very seriously. He spent hours reading their stories and looking at their school records. "This boy reminds me of me, Mama," he said, pointing to one application. "See how he's trying to take care of his little sisters? And this girl, she walks 5 miles to school every day because she promised her dead father she would become a doctor." Chisholm watched her son's face as he talked about these children. He had the same compassion that had made Emeka go back into that sinking bus to save others. The thought warmed her heart. The scholarship program grew quickly. Word spread, and other business people in the area started contributing. By the end of the first year, they had enough money to help 12 children instead of 5. On the 3rd anniversary of the accident, Chisholm woke up feeling strange. 3 years, it seemed both very long and very short. She dressed carefully in a blue dress that Emeka had always liked and gathered the children to visit his grave. Obinna, Kelechi, and David met them there, each carrying small bunches of flowers. The cemetery was quiet that morning, with just the sounds of birds and distant traffic. Emeka's grave was simple, a mound of earth with a wooden cross bearing his name. Chisholm had planted flowers around it that were now blooming bright yellow and purple. They stood in a circle around the grave. No one spoke for a long time. What was there to say that hadn't been said? Each person was lost in their own thoughts and memories. Then little Chidi, now 9 years old, broke the silence. He tugged at Obinna's hand to get his attention. "Uncle Obinna," he asked in his clear child's voice, "if my papa hadn't pushed you out of the window, would you still have your repair shop?" Everyone looked at Chidi, surprised by the question. Obinna seemed struck by it. He knelt down slowly until he was eye level with the boy, his knee pressing into the soft cemetery ground. "No, Chidi," he answered honestly, his voice gentle but serious. "Without your father, many things would not exist. My shop, Kelechi's boutique, David's fund for families." He placed his big hand on Chidi's small shoulder. "And most importantly, we wouldn't have you and your family in our lives." Chidi nodded, taking this in. Then he smiled, a smile so much like Emeka's that it made Chisholm's stop and catch her breath. The twins moved closer to their mother, holding her arms. Ikenna stood tall and straight beside David, looking more like a man than a boy now. As they walked back to their cars, Chisholm thought about how much had changed in 3 years. From the darkest time of her life had come this strange new family, not connected by blood, but by something just as strong: her husband's courage and the lives it had touched. Emeka's legacy wasn't just the money that had made their lives easier, or even the scholarship program helping other children. It was this circle of people who looked out for each other, who remembered every day that life was precious, and that kindness could echo for years in ways you might never expect.